Carl from Dayton, Ohio. On a recent episode of his podcast, Kurt Angle revealed that Brock Lesnar was open to joining TNA in 2007. When Lesnar asked about how much money Angle was making in TNA and Angle told him, Brock said that he would come to TNA if Kurt could get him the same amount. When Angle approached TNA about bringing in Brock, TNA told him that they were not going to give him that kind of money. Assuming what Angle said is legit and TNA ended up giving him the money and signing Lesnar, how would this have affected TNA, and what are some wrestlers you think would have been paired well with Lesnar at the time? I think that Brock coming back to wrestling for the first time in 3 years, because in 2007 it would have been 3 years. Not counting the stuff he did in Japan for Inoki. If you count it from when he left WWE, he left in 2004. So in 2007 it would have been 3 years gone. And that would have been a big deal, I think, for the first couple of matches. And then he would have ended up as every other big name on the roster. He would have just been another big name on the roster. I don't think it would have made much of a long-term business difference outside of bleeding them out of money faster. If it would have had a long-term business consequence, it would have been a negative long-term business consequence, which is probably why they said, we're not going to offer him that amount of money. I think he probably could have convinced TNA to bring in Paul Heyman, though. And see, that would have made things easier for Brock, but that would have been very interesting longer term, because if Dixie had Heyman working for her, and Paul is a very cunning guy, right? If Paul is working in TNA at the time, who knows what kind of position he would have eventually been able to talk himself into while he was working there. Because I guarantee you that if he came in as a manager for Brock Lesnar in 2007, Paul Heyman wasn't just going to end up being a manager in TNA. Eventually, he would have ascended to a much higher position, whether it was a writer or some other higher position of influence in the company. And that would have been very interesting. See, to me, that's the bigger what-if question. Brock comes in, he does a few big matches, big whoop. Heyman comes in, and that could potentially change the entire culture and future of that company. Now, as far as the TNA roster goes at the time, Kurt Angle would have been the obvious opponent for Brock. Samoa Joe, Abyss. I'm sure Jeff Jarrett would have finagled his way into a match with Brock. David from Sacramento, since their run in NXT, Charlotte, Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, and Bayley have been deemed the Four Horsewomen in the way that Triple H, HBK, Hall, Nash, and X-Pac were deemed the Clique. My question is, if Sasha Banks indeed comes back to WWE, do you see any reason for these four to finally unite on screen as a faction? To me, the only case to finally form this group at this point would be to take over WWE as a whole. I could see Becky returning to NXT and having a run as the women's champion, Sasha and Bayley as tag team champions on both NXT and the main roster, and Charlotte as the SmackDown women's champion. All this leaving Bianca Belair as the final target that even together all four cannot beat. This would eventually lead to the group dissolving into a fatal four-way at WrestleMania, with Sasha walking out the victor, since the other three have had their individual big match wins. Well, first, I have to correct you. The Clique and the Horsewomen are in no way alike. In no way are they alike. The Clique was formed as a group of friends who watched out for each other on the road. Yeah, they all knew what each other made, what they were being paid, to try to make sure they weren't being screwed. Right? They hung out together, they partied together. It was a brotherhood, which wasn't always good news for the other people on the roster. But it was a brotherhood. Charlotte, Sasha, Becky, Bayley, they came through NXT as friends, and some of them still are, but that's where it ends, right? They're all off doing their own thing. They were deemed the Horsewomen because there were four of them, and Charlotte's dad was a horseman. None of the other women have any connection to the Four Horsemen in any way. It sounds marketable. That's why they did it. That's really the only reason for it. Now, having Becky or Sasha or any of them go back to NXT would be a complete waste of them. NXT is the developmental brand now. As it is, Shawn Michaels convinced Triple H to let him have the New Day. Now they're the NXT Tag Team Champions. They're going to be the NXT Tag Team Champions probably at least until February, so they can try to move more tickets when they're back on the road for that Vengeance Day show. But you're going to have Becky Lynch who is legitimately one of the biggest stars in the entire company, male or female, spend her time in NXT or half her time in NXT? I mean, that is ridiculous. NXT is the developmental brand now 100%. It is not the black and gold anymore. Becky Lynch, like I said, is one of their biggest stars on the entire roster. Why would you send her back to NXT? The last thing we need is some sort of takeover where they're all overexposed on 3 different shows. I know you're trying to create some kind of like super faction with this. I don't want to see that. I do think a 4-way match one day with all 4 women could be big if it's built up well. So Charlotte, Sasha, Becky, and Bayley in the ring together, against each other, I think would be a big match. But the rest of this, no way. Absolutely not. And Sasha Banks, by the way, who I don't think is coming back to WWE right now, if she was to come back to WWE, I would like to think that they have a better idea on what to do with her than just put the tag team titles back on her. That's the last thing she was doing before she walked out. I would like to think they could come up with something a little bit better than that.